The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation says it is going to stop funding the conservative group known as ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Coalition. It's a group that promotes conservative legislation at the state level. A spokesman for the Gates Foundation telling Roll Call newspaper this week that it does not plan to make any future grants to ALEC. The Coca-Cola Corporation and Pepsi both had corporate memberships with ALEC, and both of those companies have announced plans to drop those memberships. So has Kraft Foods, telling Politico last week that it will not renew its membership in ALEC. Same with Intuit, the software company behind Quicken and TurboTax. And same with McDonald's. McDonald's telling Mother Jones that that company has also decided not to renew its ALEC membership this year. In other words, tough times are falling on the folks at ALEC, as the group's typically quiet efforts to push conservative legislation in the states have been getting a lot more attention lately. From the stand your ground gun laws, like the controversial Florida measure at the center of the Trayvon Martin case right now, which ALEC worked with the NRA to export to other state legislatures, to new make it harder to vote laws, which an ALEC task force adopted in 2009, to draconian anti-immigration measures, a la Arizona's Papers, Please law, which closely resembles a model bill drafted at an ALEC conference. The stuff ALEC does, the legislation ALEC peddles and proliferates among the states, is increasingly being regarded as toxic. It's a group that has counted in the past on flying under the radar, on nobody knowing what they're doing. And now that they are no longer under the radar, now that people are paying attention to who they are and what they do, ALEC, frankly, is becoming political poison. And so now is a really bad time to be known as a politician who keeps introducing legislation that's kind of sort of written by ALEC. Which is to say, it's a really bad time to be New Jersey's Republican Governor Chris Christie. The New Jersey Star-Ledger having just found a pattern of similarities between ALEC's proposals and several measures championed by the Christie administration. Now, you might think being outed as the guy who keeps introducing ALEC legislation would be the worst current political problem for New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, but it turns out Governor Christie is having a really bad political time right now in more ways than one. Being the ALEC guy at precisely the moment when public opinion is turning against ALEC, when even big companies who didn't mind being part of it before are running away from ALEC in a full-on sprint. At the same time that is happening, Governor Christie is also now having to deal with a $1.5 billion corporate welfare record, which is getting more and more attention at a time he really wants to seem like a fiscal conservative. Having not even served a full term as New Jersey governor yet, Chris Christie is on the hook for having passed out a record amount of state money to corporations, $1.5 billion. And then there's today's bombshell in the New York Times. News that the reasons Chris Christie gave at the time for unilaterally killing the biggest public works project in the country might not have been real reasons. And this is based on findings from a Government Accountability Office report, a bipartisan, nonpartisan report that is set to be released this week. The Times is reporting today that Governor Christie exaggerated when he said that unforeseen costs to his state were forcing him to cancel a new train tunnel between New Jersey and New York. The Times finding that Mr. Christie also misstated New Jersey's share of the project's costs. And while Mr. Christie said at the time that the agreement with the federal government would have required the state to pay for any and all cost overruns in the project, the GAO report says the federal government was in fact offering to share those costs. So what was the problem? Well, having nixed the big tunnel project, Governor Christie spent the money for it, spent the tunnel money on the state's transportation trust fund, which it just so happens was almost empty at the time, and which it just so happens is funded by a gasoline tax, which it just so happens Chris Christie made a campaign promise not to raise. So, how do these dots connect? Killing a giant state-federal infrastructure project did a couple of things for Chris Christie. It helped make him a famous conservative Republican guy. He's known as the guy who stood up to the feds and killed this expensive tunnel project. He's got his own bridge to nowhere, but he killed it. It also gave him an extra $4 billion to help him keep a campaign promise, an extra $4 billion to funnel into the Transportation Trust Fund and thereby keep his promise not to raise the gas tax, which incidentally was the second lowest in the nation. It also means that Amtrak and New Jersey Transit trains will continue to share two century-old single-track tunnels underneath the Hudson River. That's all there is. And those tunnels are now operating at capacity. Over the next 2 decades, demand is projected to grow 38%. Where will the projected growth go if the tunnels are already at capacity? Chris Christie made sure it would go nowhere.